And welcome back to devlog. In the last part, and in this part, my game has a lot of little mysteries in its design, and one of these is the way that the complexities of spells will interact with the player. For example, what happens if you set something on fire and touch it? What happens if you cast a large movement spell on yourself? What happens if you tell an object to move very, very quickly and it whacks you in the face? We're talking about the last one, by the way. So to start rolling in my game, all you really need to do is affect an object with a large amount of force and then have it collide with the player. So, we get the player, we get an object, we apply a little force to it, and that's... okay, it might be more complicated than this. Let's talk about physics calculations. When affecting an object that can move in my game with a spell that applies a level of movement to the object, these being the push, pull, rise and fall runes, this will apply a certain amount of physics to the object. What we're doing is we're casting a spell towards an object, and depending on the combination of runes, it is having physics applied to it and moving the object based on what was hitting it. So, if we use, for example, free pull spells, this is going to pull the object towards the direction of the player, or the direction we cast the spell in, for an amount of the regular pull force multiplied by the number of pull runes we have used. So if we use one pull rune, this could be in a value of 6. If we use 3 pull runes, this would be a value of 18. And then we're just going to be moving this object this amount of force in the direction that it's being set in. The object's going to slow down as it's on the ground, or if it's in the air, it's not going to slow down at all because no friction is acting on it. It has the exact same motion controller as the player. I'm just dictating what force is being applied to it and telling it to slow down eventually if it is on the ground. When moving, we have another physics calculation added. It will check in the direction of movement if the player is there, and then if the player is there, it's collided with the player. What happens in this sense is we have a physics calculation occur, and we have the player be collided by this object. What we do in this sense is have the object bounce off the player so it stops moving and gives the impression of an impact. We play an impact visual, and then we set the player into their rolling state. Once the player is in their little rolling state, all that happens in this is they roll. You know how balls go downhill when you drop the ball on the hill? That's what the player is doing. Essentially, all that is happening in the rolling state is that the player is going to be rolling in the direction that they have been hit in, which is just the transfer direction that the object was moving in. So we have our direction for the object, this smacks into the player's skull, the player then moves in the same direction, and then the player has the exact same calculation looking for an object to collide with. Once the player has hit a wall, they will stop being rolling and they will enter their stunned little animation, which I may have not finished drawing yet. And then they will return to normal. What this state is used for in game is let's talk about visuals. The visuals for the rolling is essentially just a bunch of smear frames. What are smear frames, you may ask? Well, smear frames are frames in 2D or 3D animation now, where there is a fast set movement, so you draw the smear of the movement, sort of like drawing a motion blur, but more cartoony. You... You will draw this sort of motion of the player moving very quickly, in this instance them rolling, and then you will simply draw motion over this as if there is a blur applied to this cartoony movement, and then when played very, very quickly, your eyes don't register it, but your brain does, and it gives the impression of very, very quick movement. If you would like an example of a smear frame, here is the rolling smear frames. There is 6 different smears for each rolling direction, so forward, back, diagonally up, diagonally down, and to the right. And these are just the directions of movement the player can move in. These animations are just played on a loop very, very quickly, so you don't really see the crudeness of the animation, but you do get the impression of the motion as the player is moving through these animations very quickly in their rolling motion. Why did I animate this rolling animation with a smear frame? 2 reasons. Firstly, it's a lot easier. Secondly, looks funny. I like when she rolls to the side. She's like a little blur. And that is all there is to this feature. Essentially, this is a very visually heavy feature to include in the game. It is just the player moving at a very fast little motion with a funny animation applied to them. This generally is added to give a lot of feedback to a movement, this being if you make an object slam into you, because without the rolling, it would mostly just bounce off you, and then maybe the player would be in a staggering animation, but that's not very interesting. And I really enjoy this sort of physics calculation in the game, where the player can enact on objects and have them equally enact on the player. It gives a lot of feedback to the actual motion of the moving object, this being giving the impression of it moving very quickly because it is hitting you with such a force that you are rolling and caught off guard. As with a lot of mechanics in my game, I don't actually envision there being a lot of instances in which the rolling is going to be particularly useful in solving anything in-game. The only thing I can particularly imagine the rolling being useful for is mayhaps if there is a side quest involving racing somebody, you could manipulate the rolling in such a way that you would be winning the race easier because you are rolling, and the speed at which you are rolling is significantly higher than the player's base movement speed. But that is my only thought as to the usage of rolling. But luckily, all you have to do is make an open-ended enough game with enough player options, and eventually someone will stumble into a situation where the rolling is useful, and they'll be like, wow, Slug Glove really designed a real doozy with this one, some real complexity. I can't believe the rolling was so useful in this one niche circumstance, and I'll be able to sit on my high horse and be like, oh, yes, I designed that all from the start. I had created this intricate movement mechanic for this one instance, and in reality, I've just been stupid this whole time. Bye.